All right, y'all. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm here. My name is Jason Estevez, and I'm here with the Georgia Department, or sorry, Environmental Protection Division, EPD, and they are the state agency tasked with everything environment, or most everything environment across the state. Joining us here this evening are a few folks. One is Deanna Ozer, who is the Assistant Branch Chief for the Air Protection Branch. And we also have William Cook, who is the Program Manager for Solid Waste. And we have Katie Hegarty, who is the Policy Director at EPD. And what we're going to focus on this evening is a couple things. We're going to focus the presentation. They prepared about 20 to 25 minutes of information about what EPD has been doing related to specific concerns with Senate District 6. And for those of you who are not aware, Senate District 6 goes from Grove Park all the way north to East Cobb, Buckhead, southwest part of Sandy Springs. The Chattahoochee River runs right through it. So there are a lot of concerns in this area, particularly as it relates to ethylene oxide emissions, the coal ash pond at Plant McDonough, right on the river. And then there's also several water treatment plants along the Chattahoochee River, two right across from each other, one in the city of Atlanta, one Cobb County. And I know that there are some neighborhoods that have noxious smells. Certainly my neighborhood has a noxious smell occasionally. And we want to talk through what EPD does and has been doing related to those issues, and then answer questions that folks may have. We have a Q&A box, so make sure as questions come up to type in and post those questions, and we'll make sure they get answered. And then this town hall is also being recorded. So if you have friends, neighbors who missed this, we are more than happy to share this both in my newsletter and on my YouTube page. So with that, I'd like to ask William Cook to kick us off. I think William's starting, or is it Deanna?
Yes.
Yes.
No, you're correct.
All right. So let's start with William. And then I also want to shout out Dustin Hillis, City Council member for District 9, who has joined us as well, City of Atlanta, District 9. Thank you so much for joining us, Dustin, or Councilman Hillis.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator, for providing this opportunity for us. Hopefully I successfully got myself off mute and everybody can hear me. I will now share the presentation we have for you. So I'll be going first, and as introduced by the Senator, I'm William Cook, and I'm the Program Manager for the Solid Waste Management Program. And I'm sharing the presentation now, and make sure got that on display mode. All righty. And part of what I do in the program is I have a solid waste permitting unit, environmental monitoring, and both of those are crucial in implementing our coal ash or coal combustion residuals rules. And again, that's what I'll be covering in the first part of the presentation here. And then I'll be turning over to Deanna Ozer, who will handle the air quality side. On this first slide, we just wanted to show again that EPD works with local governments when we permit facilities. In the case where we permit coal ash surface impoundments, closures, as well as for doing landfills and that sort of things. And some of the integral parts that in working with local government is before we issue permits, and this is true with the coal ash sites, is there has to be, again, approved zoning for that type of activity. And certainly there has been for years for Plant McDonough as far as the storing of the coal ash and for electric power producing in that site. Also, local governments are crucial in issuing the business license, building permits, and they also enforce any local ordinance or rules, which can be more stringent sometimes in the state rules. And that's just kind of general in nature as far as EPDs and working with local governments and permitting. On the coal combustion residual side, or also referred to as CCR, or also known as coal ash, the Georgia Environmental Protection Division implemented rules that became effective in November of 2016 to regulate the disposal of coal ash. We had been regulating landfills for years, but we had not been regulating surface impoundments until the EPA rules came into effect, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But we did implement our own state rules in 2016, and essentially what they did is adopted the federal coal combustion rules by reference. So we adopted almost everything that US EPA had implemented, including groundwater protection standards. So what we implement are federal standards. But in addition to that, our rules were actually more stringent than the federal in the sense that we went ahead and included legacy coal combustion residual units into ours. There isn't anything in the Plant McDonough area that would be considered legacy. Those were all either considered active or inactive sites. And another thing that we require also is that there is financial assurance for all those CCR units to be closed in place, or and for any operating CCR units. So any of the landfills, the surface impoundments that get closed in place are required to demonstrate, in this case, Georgia Power would have to demonstrate financial assurance. And simply what that means is they've got funding set aside where they can close those if something were to happen financially with the company itself. And then also beyond what EPA requires is we do require beneficial reuse demonstration for any unencapsulated use of CCR. So this basically means if the ash isn't going to be used in cement or concrete production, if it's actually going to be loosely placed in a location for, it can be for road beds, it could be for other demonstration purposes or for other purposes, there would have to be a demonstration that it would not harm the environment for that to be used in place of regular materials. And again, we require it for essentially for any amount. It could be for a pound of it, or it could be for tons of it. And again, EPA has a little bit higher threshold for when they would be a part of that. And again, that's not anything that Georgia Power has come to us since we've implemented the rules. And also, we do require semi-annual groundwater reporting. EPA only requires annual, so we do require it twice a year. And then also, and I'm sorry, EPA does require it also twice a year, I apologize, but they only require annual reporting of it, where we actually require the reports to be sent to us on a semi-annual basis. But I do apologize that we both require that the monitoring be done semi-annually. And then another thing that we do is this above what EPA requires is we actually require coal ash management plans and annual reporting for municipal solid waste landfills, which are the only other landfills in the state that can actually accept coal ash. So if any of those do, they had to provide a plan and then report to us on how they're implementing that plan and how much ash they're getting into their landfills. And there's only 7 of those in the state that currently do that. Since we implemented the rules, we have amended them twice, and the primary reason for doing so was to align our rules with the EPA rules, particularly in a couple of cases where they had made the rules a little more stringent. Then we came in behind them and adopted those. And then we've done a little bit of cleanup where we've moved some references that were no longer valid and clarifying a few sections. As I mentioned, EPA did implement their rules in 2015. They were done as self-implementing. And then in the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act, or otherwise known as the WIN Act, was passed in Congress in early 2016. that allowed for state CCR programs to be approved that could operate in lieu of the federal program or the self-implementing program at the time. We had to basically be as stringent as the federal program. And as I mentioned in the last slide, we are. And the good thing about the program is it also allowed for partial approvals, because there is one area that we had not implemented at this time, and it's still a question whether we may do so or not, and that's just related to endangered species. That's something that would still be done on the federal level and not the state. The WIN Act also provided the opportunity for EPA to develop their own permitting program in states that are not participating. But as I've mentioned, Georgia is a participating state. We've implemented our rules, and more importantly, or as importantly, we also submitted an application to EPA requesting approval of the program in 2018, and then we revised that application in May of 2019, going for full approval. And once we learned we didn't have adopted the appropriate endangered species provisions, we then bumped that back to just a partial approval. So that's the only part of the program we did not adopt, is the endangered species portion or rules. EPD did receive that partial approval for our program effective on February 10th, 2020. So as far as the actual implementation of the program, what we actually do is we recommend either approval or denial of CCR permit applications for new landfills or major modifications to existing landfills. We review and make approvals or denials for closure plans, post-closure for those that are closed in place, for surface impoundments and existing landfills. We also review groundwater monitoring plans that are submitted as a part of either a existing or new landfill, as well as for those going into post-closure care. And then certainly conduct site inspections to make sure that the permits are being followed as well, which would again include possible closure plans, groundwater monitoring plans. If they're actually a facility in operation, it would be for design and operation plans, making sure that they're in compliance. And one important note here I do want to stress is that Georgia Power did decide to early on close all of their surface impoundments, so none of those will remain in operation. So sorry about that. So in addition to that, we also review those CCR management plans and reports that we were just talking about for municipal solid waste landfills. In addition, we review groundwater monitoring reports. So this is, again, a continuous thing. As I mentioned, these are submitted twice a year. Occasionally, CCR constituents are found in groundwater and they're above groundwater protection standards, but they're actually not a result of the CCR that's in the ground. And so in this case, Georgia Power can provide alternate source demonstrations, basically meaning it comes from another source and not from the coal ash in the ground. And so we will review those and either deny or approve them. And then in cases where there is constituents in groundwater, there's not an alternate source demonstration made, and it is the result of metals leaching out from that coal ash into groundwater, then Georgia Power would go through, or the applicant, which there's only one other besides Georgia Power, and that's Scripps County Power Authority. But they would just implement or they would provide a remedy selection draft. We will review that, and I'll go into that process a little bit more as it relates to McDonough in just a few minutes. And then we also do CCR rule updates as needed. And then there you can see on the slide the resources we have toward this program. So 5 full-time folks work on it, and then managers like myself, and I've got 2 unit managers that work on this as well. So in the actual implementation of the program, we initially received 30 applications, which is a lot for us to receive in one single year. We've received 2 more since then and actually had one of those permits withdrawn. As of this time, we've been able to issue 18 of those, and you can see there in the slide how that breaks down, essentially 7 landfills, 11 surface impoundments. And at this point in time, we've received 8 of the draft remedy selection reports. And again, what these remedy selection reports do is they present a demonstration for how in this case, most of the time it's Georgia Power, plan to lower those detected metals in the groundwater so that they can get those below groundwater protection standards. And once we review the draft, it will go out for an opportunity for public comment. And then after public comments, then the remedy will be selected and then implemented so that Georgia Power can get started on that to reduce those metal concentrations in groundwater. So now to get more closer to home, as Senator Estevez mentioned, there are Plant McDonough does have ash ponds in this area, and there are 4 of those. You have Ash Pond 1, which is smaller. It has approximately 25 acres of coal ash, comprising about 1.4 million cubic yards. They did have a Ash Pond 2, but that was consolidated with Ash Pond 3 and 4. So the former footprint for Ash Pond 2, all the ash was removed from that, and it previously held 260,000 cubic yards. And then the Ash Ponds 3 and 4 were consolidated into a 64-acre footprint and now hold approximately 4.9 million cubic yards. For Plant McDonough, Ash Pond 1, it is a closure in place. And so the way that occurs, and there's a smaller diagram, hopefully everybody can see that on their screen. This just shows a cap above the coal ash, which prevents any rainwater from percolating through it and into the coal ash, which then could percolate through the coal ash and into groundwater. So that's what the cap is designed to do, is to prevent that from occurring. So all the water will run off instead on the clean cap. And in this particular case, there's currently ongoing discussions. And I do want to stress that this permit has not been issued yet for Plant McDonough Ash Pond 1. We're still in discussions. And part of those discussions is a subsurface perimeter barrier wall or an underground barrier wall that would basically isolate that ash from the surrounding soils and groundwater. They also have a groundwater monitoring plan. Again, this is also under review, but currently, this is by rule, they are required to enter post-closure care for 30 years. So they have to monitor it for at least that length of time, and it could be longer depending upon the results that they have at that time. There are 8 groundwater monitoring wells and what's called 5 assessment wells, which help to delineate the extent of the plumes for what you'll see in the next bullet point under remedy selection for arsenic and cobalt. Those are the only 2 metals they currently have above groundwater protection standards. And the proposal they currently have under review is what they call in situ injection, which helps to isolate those metals and to prevent them from further spreading. Again, there will be a public comment period prior to finalizing the selection. I want to stress that these are contained on site. There's only one well that was actually just across the road on a Cobb County right-of-way where cobalt was detected, but it has decreased in that particular well. It's not been found any place further out. And I believe they are planning on showing us that that well is actually showing compliance levels in it now. All right. And then for Plant McDonough's Ash Ponds 2, 3, and 4, do lump up these all together. We've also had a permit submitted to us, application for closure in place. I do want to stress for Ash Pond 2, as I mentioned before, has actually been removed. So there's a smaller consolidated footprint for Ash Pond 3 and 4. The proposal is to use a cap again over this landfill. And as you can tell in the picture, they've actually already got that in place. Again, so even before the permit's finalized, they can go ahead and prevent that rainwater from percolating down through the ash. This is a bigger a closed surface impoundment. So it's got 20 monitoring well and actually has 23 assessment wells that are surrounding it. Excuse me. And it's got arsenic, beryllium, cobalt, and lithium that are above groundwater protection standards. Um, Again, it's also proposed for in situ injection to control those and immobilize them. And again, there'd be a public comment period prior to finalizing selection. As I mentioned before, again, these are currently just detected on the Georgia Power property, as I mentioned already, for cobalt. I think that was the only one in this group. And beryllium actually were detected in one single well on the cobalt. And again, the beryllium also was trending downward, and I believe maybe in compliance now as well. Um, so again, not affecting anything off the property as far as groundwater is concerned right now. All right, and then finally, there is additional information that you can find related to our program. So on the Georgia EPD's Coal Ash website, excuse me, we do post all of our permits when they're ready for draft and public comment. We certainly will do so for the Plant McDonough ash ponds. The ones we're probably closest to getting the draft permit is ash pond 2, 3, and 4. And it's still probably a month or two off, or more like 2 months before we think we may be at a draft spot where we have a draft permit. You can also find more information related to this at the Georgia Power's websites as well. It's particularly related to groundwater monitoring data. You can also find that on our website too. And then EPA also has a different has information on coal ash as well on their website. So again, a lot of good information on 3 of these as it relates to coal ash. EPD will have it specific again for Georgia, and then Georgia Power's got it for obviously each of their plants. And with that, that's all they have for coal ash at this point. I'd like to turn it over to Deanna Ozer, who will talk on the air quality side.
And Deanna, thank you. Thank you, William. Deanna, before you begin, I just want to ask 2 quick questions that I'm sure are bubbling in people's heads right now. The first question is, how does EPD monitor for quality control, QA, the self-reporting of the groundwater that Georgia Power is doing?
Okay, oh, great question. And I should have emphasized this when EPD we implement our rules, that's not self-implementing. They're actually required to submit the reports to us. So all the groundwater monitoring reports are required to be sent to us again twice a year. We review those and all the data is collected. All the monitoring is done by a third party, so it's not done by Georgia Power. And that third party information is submitted to us. If we have any questions, and times we will ask that those questions or comments we have to be answered. And so we've had a lot, especially with the groundwater monitoring plans, that we've had a lot of back and forth as far as what needs we may see there, and have actually had them put in additional wells as a part of that. So we do provide that oversight. So great question.
Great. And then the last question, and I'll make sure to answer more questions at the end. And I think this is similar to a question that's been asked in the chat. As far as notice and then public comment, how is the public notified about the opportunity to comment on these plans? And then when do these periods open and close? How long of a period does the public have?
Okay. Again, great questions. On our website, and I'll bounce back to that one for just a moment. So you can go, if you go to the epdgeorgia.gov website, there's a place where you can actually sign up. I think it may actually refer you to the coal ash information page, but there's a place where you can actually sign up to get public notices anytime there's changes to the website. I don't think there's necessarily specific on what it is that's being added, but there's not a whole lot of times that they're added, so it's not like be flooded with those emails. But what we do is when we get ready when we've drafted the permit, we'll post it on the website. The delivery notice will go out, and from the time we post it, we'll give 60 days. In this particular case, since these are being closed in place, we give 60 days for public comment. And so the way to know that what time, because right now we don't have a specific timeline like when that will become available. So the best way to do it is to sign up on that delivery notice. And then when you receive an email saying that there's been an addition to the coal ash website, just go to it. And we have a draft permit page. And so you would see Plant McDonough, and they would be at the very top of that list. So you don't have to scroll through another 18 of them that are listed there.
Awesome. Well, you certainly taught me some things. So I appreciate that. I'm
Right, you're
sure there'll
welcome.
be more questions about coal ash a little bit later, but Deanna?
Well, thank you. So I'm going to move to the air side for a couple of facilities in this area. And I wanted to step back a little bit and give you a kind of bigger picture about what we do here at the air branch. And a lot of this falls into line with what William was talking about. And I think we did mention ETO. Before I was assistant branch chief, I was our ambient monitoring manager. And I actually was manager of the group that led the ETO monitoring we did in Cobb County for 4 years. So I have a few bits of information on that. But one of the things I wanted to start talking with was the relationship between EPA and where EPD comes up with its rules. And I used air here for an example, but this would be very similar for what William does with land and our water counterparts do is Congress passes the acts. EPA passes the regulations. And for air, EPA regulates with ambient air quality standards. So those are ones that are health-based standards for all people to breathe for things such as fine particulate matter. And that's like 30 pieces of them can get on the width of a human hair. So we're talking real small, gets in the capillaries of your lungs. Ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, things like that. However, for toxics, they don't have standards in the ambient air. They regulate those by controls on the specific industries. That's what I have there for national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants. Things like the sterilizers, the water reclamation facilities, such as RM Clayton, we're talking about tonight. They also have new source performance standards. So as new industries come in, or as industries come in, they can regulate the pollutants that way too. And even if it's not a new industry, we have the emission guidelines to make sure that when EPA sets those toxic standards, we go back and catch the grandfathered facilities as well. So that's the federal side. Like William said, a lot of our rules are incorporated by reference. EPA sets them. We are delegated to carry them out. We also have the General Assembly that sets rules. Some rules you might be familiar with for ETO. Every leak has to be reported, which is much more stringent than what the federal rules are. And that's because that was a Senate bill that was passed last year, or I'm sorry, COVID timeframe, things kind of go all together. But during a couple years ago, the House or Senate bill passed where all leaks have to be reported. If you live in Cobb County, you get your vehicle inspected every year near your birthday. Thank you very much. That's helped with our ozone. But the state law actually tells us how much that vehicle emissions can cost. It provides the range. And then for any law or any rule that EPD wants to enact, whether we're in land, water, or air, we have to have that approved by the Board of Natural Resources. So I wanted y'all to get a big picture of kind of any rule that we have, it's gone through multiple layers. So you can go to the next slide, William. And I talk fast. I'm a Southern girl that talks really fast. So please let me know, Senator, if I need to slow down a little bit. The biggest takeaway for any part of EPD is once those local government ordinances are passed and the building permits are given and they've proven they can meet our federal rule, the federal rules we're incorporating into those permits, the state rules, we have to issue that permit. So EPD does not have the authority to choose not to issue the permit. For the air quality side, we make sure, like I said, the federal and state regulations are incorporated. There's no significant impact to air quality. Like I said, I used to run the ambient monitoring network. We have a very robust network to keep track of the air quality across the state for what you're breathing. And we want to make sure that they do not provide unacceptable risk to nearby residents. And I'll talk about that in a second to put that in perspective. But again, if the facility can meet all these requirements, we must issue the permit by our laws. Go ahead, William. So William talked about the report reviews, because I know a lot came up, especially with the ethylene oxide discussions a couple years ago of self-reporting. yes, facilities do report to us what, every 6 months, like William said, but we have 400 facilities. We're looking at these inspections, and very similar to your tax documents you are submitting in the next month or two, you're submitting to EPA, to the IRS, and they are auditing what you're doing and they're reviewing your reports for accuracy. We do the very similar process. We review the reports, we look at the permits and make sure everything's fine, and we do take a lot of enforcement on those reports that are submitted to us. We also audit the stack tests. That was where I started my career. And when they do the testing to see if they're in compliance with the permit, just like William said with Georgia Power, auditing those monitoring wells, they have a third party come in. We are often out there watching to make sure it's done correctly, following the correct procedures. And then we also review each and every report that comes in to make sure that those are done properly. You can go on, William. One of the things that came up in our discussions is how do you find out about the complaints that have been issued against this facility? Everything we do, of course, with the state is public information. And once a complaint is closed out, so that's very important. While it's an open investigation, it will not be available here, but you can actually go to this website, to our complaint tracking system. This is the public portal. You can put in address, the dates, a lot of information, and search and see what was done for a facility. And for the Cobb County area, if you have any complaints, our Mountain District office in Cartersville handles Cobb County. It is a multimedia office. So if you have, we don't regulate odors, which we'll talk about in a second, but if you see, if you have questions about the facility, or if you think something's not quite going right, you can actually call the district office, file a complaint, and then they will log it into the system once it's closed. We'll keep going. So ethylene oxide, I know that was a hot topic for a couple of years, especially in a couple of areas around the state. In case you are just learning about it, it's used to sterilize medical products and chemical manufacturing. EPA did classify it as a hazardous pollutant. It's one of those national emission standards for hazardous pollutants that I mentioned earlier. They've had regulations since 1994 that EPA has had us incorporate into their permits, where they had control equipment for ETO. And until EPA changed the carcinogenic value, everything was fine. In 2016, they changed the value. They declared that the ETO was more toxic than they had originally thought. So all the facilities we had in Georgia were in compliance with the current standards at that time. Sterigenics was in compliance with their current permit, which did meet the current federal rule. However, we went ahead and took some precautionary measures that we'll discuss in a minute. But in 2018, the IRS value was changed to 2016. That's the toxicity value. And in 2018, EPA released a new National Air Toxics Assessment, which identified areas that we needed to look further. Cobb County was one of those areas. So you can go on. Thanks. We did our own modeling, permit modeling for this facility with the information we had. EPA's risk level is 100 in a million. When we issue our permits, we look for a risk level of less than 1 in a million. So our permits are issued on a much more stringent basis than what EPA's toxic guidelines or toxic assessments are looking at. And this, what used to be every 3 years, but now they're doing it annually. But for all the permits that we do, if there's a hazardous pollutant, we look at the affected neighborhoods and try to get that risk down below 1 in a million. So again, the permit had been issued previously under the old regulations and everything was fine. When this new toxicity assessment came out, Georgia EPD required Sterigenics to go in and they retested all the air pollution controls on the chambers. They installed negative pressure enclosures. And what that means is basically they got all the room air and enclosed it and sent it to a control device so there were no fugitives coming out. We required them to put on the continuous emission systems, which means on the exhaust stacks, we actually have an instrument that reads the ethylene oxide 24/7. and reports it and we get reports of that data, and it's continuous monitoring. It's happening all the time. Again, reporting their leaks, and we issued new permits to reflect this. And the EPA has proposed a federal rule, an updated rule based on this new toxicity value, and these requirements should meet the proposed federal rule. We saw the proposal back last April. We're waiting on the new one, on the final, and from what we've seen, all of our Georgia facilities will meet the new rule. You can go on. So this is the modeling I was talking about, and the takeaway here is the red value is, I think that risk is 3 in a million. There are no residents here. I think the orange, I'm having to look at my notes here because I didn't do this. The red circle indicates 10 in a million, my apologies. The yellow is 3 in a million, have a potential of risk, and then the green is the 1 in a million. Now, when I say a potential risk value, that means it is constant exposure over 70 years at 24 hours per day, 7 days a week. So and those are modeled values, and modeled values are very, very conservative. I think the emissions that we have been seeing from Sterigenics continuous and monitoring reports are about a quarter of what we have predicted in our modeling values. So often the modeling is the worst case scenario. So you can go on, William. Like I said, we did a 4-year monitoring project. We started in August of 2019, and we continued monitoring until September of 2022. Not only did we monitor around 3 sterilization plants in Georgia, we also monitored ethylene oxide down in, you can see down at the bottom of the screen is General Coffee. That's a state park in South Georgia with no industry nearby. And we also monitor South DeKalb monitoring station, which is our national ambient air toxic site, where we monitor for 200 different pollutants. And ETO is a required pollutant there as of 2020. You can see at the end of the average between August 2019 and September 2022, Cobb County sites, and we measured at about 6 sites around the facility. The Cobb County sites, the average there was much less than what we're measuring at our South DeKalb site, which, just to give you a point of reference, is on the east side of town, basically at I-20 and 285. There is ethylene oxide in the ambient air. Everywhere across the nation that EPA has asked for people to measure ETO at these ambient monitoring sites, we are finding ETO even if no industry is nearby. EPA is looking into that. We still don't have a good reason for it, but we do know that ethylene oxide is in the ambient air. And you can see the Cobb County levels are essentially what we saw down at General Coffee, down at the state park, where there was no industry. Just as William directed you to our EPD website for coal ash, there's also a website for ethylene oxide. All of our monitoring reports, all of our permits, all of our consent orders for when we were asking the facilities to put on the equipment prior to putting it into their permit, all of the information we have on ethylene oxide is on that page. You can go on, William. So moving away from that, getting on to the RM Clayton Reclamation Center, that's their official name, Water Reclamation Center. There are 2 sewage sludge facilities in that area, but I did check with our compliance group, and the second one, which is formerly known as RL Sutton, I think they still have a permit, but they have not operated in about 5 years. I have to go look at that number correct to make sure I'm correct, but it's been quite a while. Basically, when EPA came out with an updated national emission standard for hazardous pollutants again, RM Clayton was the only one that continued to operate because they had the controls and can meet the requirements. If you can't afford to put on the controls and can't meet the emission limits, a lot of times facilities no longer operate. And so I believe that's what happened with RL Sutton. They have 2 incinerators that are controlled by multiple stage scrubbers. They are regulated for particulate matter, hydrogen chloride, carbon monoxide. You can read the list. You can see it is a very lengthy list. The permit, I went through our permit, and it requires that they have a fully trained and qualified sewage sludge incinerator unit operator accessible at all times. So that unit can't operate unless they've got a trained operator right there on nearby, and They have annual stack tests, which are conducted and submitted to EPD for review and approval. Again, I used to be in this group. I know what it entails. We actually go out and we watch the test to be done by usually a third party, make sure the test was done properly, the facility was operating properly when the test is conducted. And then we review the test report when it comes in, from the calibration of the equipment to the lab report, to make sure that everything was conducted properly. But again, odors are not regulated by EPD. We do regulate a lot of the pollutants that cause odors. And for most of the things that smell bad, I don't know a better way to say that. There's probably a nicer way to say that. But for most of the odorous compounds, you can smell them much quicker at a much, much lower concentration than they cause any kind of impact to your health. We've seen that for a number of things where you can smell them in the parts per billion range, but there's not even an industrial hygiene standard for like OSHA type standard until the parts per billion range. So, I'm sorry, parts per million range. I said that backwards. You can smell them orders of magnitude before they cause an impact, even at OSHA levels. So, we do get a lot of complaints about odors. If we find out that the odors could be related to some sort of compound that we regulate, then our compliance teams will go out and investigate. And that's where that compliance tracking website comes in handy, because you can actually see what we did. You can go on. Again, all of our permits are available online. You can go to this website and you can search and see what all of our permits have. We do unannounced compliance inspections at all of our facilities. Well, I'm sorry, at the larger facilities. And Sterigenics and RM Clayton would both be included in this larger set. And as William had said, those compliance reports come in every 6 months to EPD, and we review them. We look at the information. We look to see if the equipment was up and running, the control equipment was up and running, and if it's not, we get more information. We keep our eyes on the facility throughout multiple ways all year long. And next slide. Oh, okay, sorry. And so that's all I had. There's mine and William's contact information, so you have it. So I can hand it back over to you, Senator.
Great. Thank you so much, Deanna. And a few questions have come in, and I know that City Councilman Dustin Hillis also has a few questions. I'll start. So with the coal ash, there's the groundwater monitoring, which is the primary concern with coal ash for constituents. That's the primary concern. Is the groundwater that's done through third-party monitoring, as William stated. What with ethylene oxide emissions? How is that? How do y'all make sure that that's not there's no manipulation that could be done with the self-reporting?
Okay.
And I saw that there's a monitoring device on there, but if you could just talk through the QA process to ensure that there's nothing being missed.
Of course.
Studies.
Sure. Not only do they have to submit the records of that monitoring device, so they have daily calibrations that are required by standards, basically a certified concentration of ethylene oxide that they have to send into it, and we can make sure that the monitor continues to read the right number. And this certified concentration, it's a cylinder gas, and it comes from another company, and we get the records of that concentration to make sure that they were challenging it at the right levels. So that's done on a daily basis. On an annual basis, they have to come through and actually do a stack test where they come in and they measure ethylene oxide through one of our normal, extracting the gas from the stack and measuring for ethylene oxide by our own, I say our equipment. We might challenge the monitor ourselves as EPD, but a third party comes in usually. The facilities are allowed to test themselves, but we definitely watch over those and make sure that they do it correctly. They have to submit a test plan to us on what they're planning to do. If we have any questions, we take care of it ahead of time. A lot of times we show up on site. They may or may not know we're coming for the test. And then we review that test. And often we will take our own equipment out and challenge those monitors ourselves to make sure that they are reading the correct number. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that does. I'll throw it over to Councilman Hillis for a couple of his questions, and there's some more as well.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Estevez. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I have one question basically about each issue that's been discussed tonight. Starting with the coal ash issue at Plant McDonough. How is any possible leaching of those coal ash ponds into the Chattahoochee River monitored?
It's done through wells, as I was mentioning, around the McDonough Ash Pond 1 itself. There are 8 wells that are down gradient, as well as an additional 5 assessment wells. And around ash ponds, or the former ash ponds 2 and the 3 and 4, there is 20 down gradient monitoring wells and 23 assessment wells. And so these are places actually where groundwater moves the quickest. And again, when I say that, that's relatively speaking, groundwater moves very slow in most cases. So if there is any constituents above groundwater protection standards, then they're caught or they're detected in those wells. Again, moves very slow, and they have compliance wells. So if it reaches a certain point, which they haven't, they have not gone beyond the property boundary yet for Georgia Powers. They have not gotten to the Chattahoochee, but that's what those wells are there for, is to detect that and then start remedy selection, which is the process that I was describing.
Gotcha. And that reporting is done in real time or daily or weekly or monthly, or how often is that reporting?
It is only done twice a year. And the reason for that is, again, the groundwater moves very slow. I think we're talking, this is pretty quick to say inches per day. It can take years for a groundwater molecule to actually make it off the property boundary. And it all depends here. I'm not sure, again, what the ground flux is what it's called for groundwater movement, but it can take a while.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Cook. So the next question is related to the water treatment facilities. Of course, I represent District 9 on the Atlanta side of the river. Always get a number of concerns about the smells. They're usually from different sources. In my experience, it's about 50-50, whether it's R.M. Clayton on the Atlanta side or R.L. Sutton on the Cobb side. But one of the issues brought up to myself from people on the know is one of the primary causes of the smell over at R.L. Sutton, which just in my opinion, Cobb has a much less intention to regulate their smells because they are on the eastern side of their boundary, and of course with prevailing westerly winds, those smells immediately go to the Atlanta side, my Ridgewood Heights neighborhood, the Bolton neighborhood, Fernleaf, Westover Plantation. One of the issues that is brought up that is contributing to their smells is they are using a process to dispose of their settled solids known as lime stabilization that the city of Atlanta used preliminarily for a number of months and decided that, hey, this is not the way to go because it creates such a smell issue. And one of the primary causes of that issue is that they are not necessarily they, but each of the plants contracts with a secondary supplier to haul away their settled solids. And on the Atlanta side, I'm constantly on our commissioner and even the COO to get those settled solids off of the site as soon as possible. But if you go by the R.L. Sutton site on the Cobb County side, they have usually many trailers full of settled solids that are present on their site. So the issue is that whoever they're contracting with is not removing those settled solids away from that site as quickly as possible. So that is what is contributing to the smell in the atmosphere, and primarily again on the Atlanta side of the river, given the prevailing wind. So is there anything that EPD can press the Cobb County government and their watershed management unit on to more quickly get those settled solids off of that site?
That is actually not part of the air quality we would handle, but I can take your concern to my counterparts in water, because that would be handled by the water side. From an air quality standpoint, they no longer they don't process the sewage sludge in their incinerators any longer. So they're not regulated by the air quality group, but they are regulated by the water group. And so I can take your concerns back to, like I said, my counterparts in water and ask them to get back to you if that would be all right.
Yeah, that would be much appreciated. And I can I tell people my constituents I'm easily findable on the internet, but I will submit to you my email address to keep me updated on that.
Please do, so I can make sure that the right person that we get back at you in a timely manner. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And the final question related to the Sterigenics issue. Of course, I get a lot of questions about Sterigenics, as I'm sure Senator Estevez does. And my usual response is, well, I represent the city of Atlanta within Fulton County, and the Sterigenics issue is based in Cobb County. So whatever Cobb County is doing, you know, a lot of these issues are legal issues. They may be discussed in an executive session, which they're not going to inform me about. But I tell people that I see what they see in the news. So the last issue that I saw on the news related to the Sterigenics facility was the ruling back in, I believe, the fall that court decided that Cobb County could indeed place some regulations, leaving it kind of broadly open, some regulations on that side as far as their admittance of that ETO. So do you know, because I know it would be helpful to have some Cobb County officials on tonight. I don't think they're present, but do you know what steps Cobb County is or plans on taking to further regulate Sterigenics emissions into the atmosphere?
No, sir, I'm not aware of any of the local regulations going on. From an air quality side, for the air permit, we have issued that permit and they are meeting that permit. But things that are done from a county or city side can be more stringent than what we do. I do not know. I have not looked into the authority of the county governments to look into what they can do from a county side for regulating air emissions.
Yeah, and I think that's something they're working through. So again, it would be very helpful to have Cobb County reps on tonight, but unfortunately, I don't believe we do. Second and lastly, on the EPD state level, how many air monitoring stations do you all monitor specific to the ETO issues around this Sterigenics facility? Because some of the highest levels were actually found in the city of Atlanta, in the Ridgewood Heights, Bolton neighborhoods.
So the Bolton neighborhood, those were not our samples that were collected. Those were done by another group. And one of the things we found in our 4-year ETO study is that ETO is very hard to measure. We actually found instances of ETO growing in the cans at some point. I did not pull out that data to show you I just showed you a straight average of all the data we collected. But we took 1,900 samples over the 4 years all across the state of Georgia. We had 6 samples, we had 4 samplers running every 6 days, sometimes every 3 days in Cobb County, for a large part of that, I think for 3 of those 4 years. And then we eventually pared it down over the last year to make sure we just didn't do a hard stop. We wanted to slowly stop our testing to make sure we weren't missing anything. We were collecting about 70 samples a month across the state of Georgia. So I feel very confident when I say we have a good handle on the ethylene oxide across Georgia. I have talked to labs that were monitoring side by side. The two samples could be collected side by side and sent to different labs. The labs were both doing it correctly, and they got vastly different numbers. So I cannot speak to anybody else's test results for ethylene oxide. I can only speak to the state of Georgia's. We operated under an EPA quality assurance project plan that was approved by EPA. And what that means is we took samples side by side once a month to make sure that we could determine if our laboratory precision was okay. Again, we were measuring right at the detection limit. If you think back to your chemistry days that we all had in high school, there's the analytical method detection limit. There's only so much you can go below, and then you're in the noise of the instrument. Well, for ethylene oxide, the measurements we were finding in the ambient air towards the end of our study were in the noise of the instruments that were actually measuring the ETO that we were pulling out of those cans. Because we collected the ethylene oxide in a silver soccer ball-like can over a 24-hour period, trying to do it as consistent as possible across the state. We collected them all at the same time to make sure we got comparable numbers. And so I don't know the procedures that were done for those measurements you're referring to, but I can tell you that the measurements we took were taken under the quality assurance project plan from EPA. We were in discussions with EPA the whole time to make sure that what we were seeing, we understood. And we were doing a lot of the research that found a lot of answers for EPA just by the sheer size of our study. That probably doesn't help you, but that's because I can't answer to the question about the Bolton samples.
So I want to make sure that I'm respectful of people's times, and if we have a few more minutes of the EPD's time, I want to make sure we get through a couple more questions. If Deanna, if you can go back to the modeling map.
Yes, sir. Wait, can you go back a couple slides?
Per million. And
Is that it?
yeah, review that one more time with the risks and what that means.
Sure. So again, these are our models predicting what we think might be the exposure over, again, they take into account the meteorology, the plant emissions over 70 years with exposure of 24 hours, 7 days a week. And I know that's what EPDA does. I believe that's what we do with our modeling as well. So the red circle, so when EPA listed that Cobb County was one of the areas they needed to look into further information on with that NADA assessment in 2018, they were looking at levels that might have had a risk level of 100 or more. Well, the information they were basing their assessment on was the new risk level of ETO and some emissions reported by the industries that may not have been quality assured to the highest level because it was older data. And as controls were put on over the years, the emissions did come down. So what you're looking at here is, I believe this was after additional controls. So after Sterigenics had put in all the controls that they have now, which means they're collecting all that room air. So it's not being emitted to the atmosphere when they open a door. They're going through multiple scrubber systems. They're making sure that they've got the best controls available, maximum achievable control technology. So what you're looking at is the red circle represents what we think would be 3 in 1 million people could possibly, if the risk was taken over this long of period, the 70 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 3 people might be impacted from the emissions of this facility. Again, you can see there's no residential areas in there. The orange areas, and make sure I say this right, I'm sorry, the yellow areas, the larger areas, is 3 people. The red areas is 10. I had those numbers backwards in my head because I didn't look at my notes. My apologies. The red area is 10. But again, there's no residential there. The yellow area is 3 in a million. And then the green area is 1 in a million. EPA's levels are 100 in a million. We were looking at trying to get it down to 1 in a million. And you can see after the controls were put in, we achieved that. And we also saw that with the ambient monitoring that was done in the facility, or around the facility, because we monitored north, south, east, west of the facility and the primary wind directions, upwind and downwind. Our report's available on that ETO website if you want to see it. But we monitored in all areas of the facility to make sure we understood where the ETO concentrations were coming from. And the ETO measurements we were getting after the controls were installed were the same as what we were seeing in places where there was no industry. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. And a couple other questions. One is related, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the smoke stacks and the stacks. They're not smoke. I don't think it's smoke. I think it's steam at Plant McDonough. Are you monitoring what's coming out of those?
So
That steam coming out of there?
yes, if it's, so I'm trying to remember what Plant McDonough looks like today. If it's a cooling tower, so if it's the parabolic shape stack, that is just water coming off of it. That is just steam. Plant McDonough does not have any coal-fired boilers anymore. It's all combustion turbines. And those we do monitor. They have those same continuous emission monitoring systems I was mentioning that Sterigenics has. They have them for NOx, nitrogen oxides, which is one of the ambient air quality standards we have. They also have it for carbon monoxide. That's the two I can remember off the top of my head without checking their permit. But the same thing applies for their continuous emission monitoring systems. And they are also under the EPA federal program for the acid rain program, which has additional monitoring and record keeping and the quality assurance of those monitors. So what we might have for the facility for the EPA national emission standards and the new source performance standards, the acid rain standards on Plant McDonough add yet another layer of quality assurance to those systems.
Thank you. And then one more quick question. As far as if a company continues to violate a plan or not live up to the permit requirements or the remediation plans, what does EPD do as far as fines and potentially shutting them down? How often are you fining companies? What's the process there?
So I can't answer part of that question because I have not worked in enforcement directly. I can tell you the overall process. The process is if we find something that is not in accordance with their permit, they are not following the permit, they're not following the rules and regulations, we will issue a notice of violation. We want more information. It could be due to an on-site inspection as well. They have to submit that information to us. If it is not satisfactory, we go to a consent order. And the consent orders can be anything from you turned your permit in late to you weren't able to fix this in a timely manner. As I mentioned, we gave Sterigenics a consent order as they were putting on the control equipment to have some, because it was not in their permit, it was voluntary measures at that time. We did the consent order to give us some legal authority with the controls they were putting on. So if a facility does not do what they said they were going to do in the consent order, we take further enforcement. If a facility gets in a consent order multiple times within, I think it's a 12-month period, that actually has to go out for public notice. So if the facility has multiple violations such that we have to issue a consent order, then the public is notified, and you can sign up for those notices on our air protection website. I can certainly send you that link, but it's not on like the ethylene oxide website. You have to actually go to air protection or land or water, and you can sign up for the notices for when new permits are issued for public notice. When we do consent orders, it's our listserv, but the public is noticed. I'm trying to think. I have been with EPD Air Protection for almost 27 years. It is very rare that somebody does not come back into compliance.
Yeah, and Deanna, just to add just real quick, once if you can't, a consent order is a voluntary agreement from the company, so they both sign, basically meaning to consent to resolve the issue. If that doesn't happen, the director has authority to issue an administrative order, which essentially just demands that the facility fix the problems. If they don't, then it can go to an order of the court, and then a judge can require it.
And based on what we heard tonight, is that information that folks would be able to see from the website if they sign up through your website?
Yes, and I believe our consent orders are also posted online. William, you even know that better than I would.
Yes, they are. And you can find the link from our main page. I mean, there's longer links we could send, but it's usually fairly easy to get navigable on our website, going to epd.georgia.gov.
Okay. And very last question, has there been any updated monitoring in the Bolton neighborhoods on the Atlanta side that you're aware of?
I'm trying to remember the neighborhoods we monitored in. We did not release the neighborhoods we monitored in while the monitoring was ongoing, because we wanted to protect the integrity of our samples. I believe we were in Westlake neighborhood. We did not monitor in Bolton. I think that was a one-time study. I don't know that they came back and did it again. I think there was some other monitoring done in Cobb County, but we were not a part of it, so I cannot say for certain.
Yeah.
But I don't have anything, any updated values for that. But I can tell you that we monitored, and so around the Sterigenics facility, we monitored, like I said, almost north, south, east, and west. And we even monitored a couple of miles, about half a mile away, to see how the wind direction changed over time. You know, the further you got from this facility, how the concentration of ETO changed. And we had about 7 sites we monitored there for about the 4 years. So but I think the Bolton County may have been a little further away than that. We were trying to stay within a 1 to 2 mile radius of the facility.
Okay.
I don't know Cobb County geography as well as I should for that conversation. My apologies.
No, it's okay. And Fulton, City of Atlanta, Bolton is right across the river. If you go
we do not monitor across the river. We did actually do some monitoring on the RM Clayton property.
Yep.
We did some monitoring on the Georgia Power property. We did some monitoring in some neighborhoods close nearby, and in the industrial park that Sterigenics was in.
Got it. Well, I appreciate y'all's time. You've been very gracious. I told you an hour. We went a little bit over, so appreciate that. There's another comment in the Q&A box about why Sterigenics has not been shut down. There has been litigation over that, and I think Councilman Hillis alluded to that. The facility was shut down for a while. A court reversed that decision at the county level, and I believe that while reasonable regulations can be put in place, I think as Deanna and William explained, as long as companies follow the prescribed rules from the EPA at the federal level, EPD at the state level, and county and local level, then you have to issue them permits to the extent those permits are available. So there are a few different layers here, and Sterigenics was reopened after that court order. I do appreciate the fact there's a misconception, certainly that I've had in the past, that the EPD issues, it has a lot of its own rules that are separate from the EPA. So I think it's great that y'all shared the fact that the EPA, that y'all really follow and then add on to what the EPA does. You don't necessarily take away or pick and choose from what the EPA does. I think that's very good information for folks to take from this conversation. Thank you, Deanna, and thank you, William, for being here this evening. And to everyone else, appreciate y'all listening in. My hope is to have more of these in the future, including with Sterigenics themselves, so that we can ask them some questions and get the latest on what they're doing. And I also did see the request to ensure that Cobb officials are present, so I will make sure that happens next time. So thank you all so much, and I'll make sure to post this and email this out to folks as soon as possible. Thank y'all. Have a good night.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.